Hey guys, in this session we are going to look at your Docker containers. So we will look at an introduction as what your Docker containers are. So in the last section we looked at your Docker images, so what your Docker images are, and we looked at some of the various commands that you can use when you're working with your Docker images. So your Docker container is what you get once you run your image. So your container is simply a runnable instance of an image. So from your Docker image you create a container, and your Docker container is simply a lightweight, standalone and executable package of software that includes everything needed to run your application. Like, it will contain the application code, it will contain the runtime environment, your system tools, system libraries, settings, everything that is needed to run your application will be available in the form of a container, and you get this from the image that you have created. Now, Docker container is simply a process that is isolated, and it has its own file system, it has its own networking and own isolated process that is separate from the host machine. So if you remember, I told you that your container is a OS level virtualization technology. So the processes, the networking, the file system, everything is isolated. So the container will have its own file system that is separate from the host machine, and the same way it will have its own networking and own set of processes that are separate from the host machine. And with your containers, you can create it, you can stop it, you can move it, you can delete a container using the Docker CLI or the Docker API commands. And you also get to connect your containers to one or more networks. You can add persistent storage to it, or you can even create a new image based out of the changes that you're going to make to a container. So what do? You have a Docker image. So Docker image is simply the instructions that will consist of like your instructions in the form of layers, like your base image, then your updating instructions, installation in the instructions, copying instructions, starting a service, stopping a service. All those things will be in the form of instructions, and from those instructions you create an image. Once you create an image, you can run it as a container. Now from one image you can run multiple containers, you can have multiple containers, and these containers will give you your containerized applications in the form of containers. So we always use an image, and from one image you can have multiple containers, running multiple containers from one image, which will give you the containerized application. And then you can start interacting with the containers, interacting with the file system. All those things you can do by working with the containers. So in the next session, we will look at the commands, the various commands that we have in your Docker containers.